Our bodies ached in ways that transcended mere fatigue, muscles trembling, joints stiffening, minds fraying at the edges. The flickering glow of Maya's equipment was one of the few lights sustaining us in the oppressive gloom. But even that was faltering. The monitors blinked erratically, capturing readings that no longer made scientific sense. Maya sat huddled beside the tangle of wires and screens, her sharp eyes weary yet unyielding. I caught her gaze as she stared at the erratic electromagnetic spikes and the strange audio feedback that defied every logical explanation she had ever held. "Elliot," she whispered, voice barely audible over the static crackling from the speakers. "I don't know what this is anymore. It's not just energy fluctuations or interference. There's something else. Something alive in here." I nodded slowly, the admission heavy between us. Maya's skepticism had been our anchor, the scientific lens through which we tried to interpret the inexplicable. But now, that lens was cracking under the weight of the supernatural we had encountered. "I've felt it, too," I admitted, my voice rough from disuse. "The manor isn't just a building. It's a living thing, breathing, watching, shaping itself." Lila sat nearby, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. Her usually pale complexion was ghostly now, her dark hair tangled and damp with sweat. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if she could see things we couldn't. She spoke in fragments, offering descriptions of visions that flickered like phantoms in her mind, hallways lit by flickering candlelight, doorways opening to endless darkness, faces from the past whispering warnings. Each vision came at a cost, a tremor of anxiety, a sudden shiver, the distant echo of cries that no one else could hear. "This way," she murmured, her voice both fragile and resolute. "The path will open where the light fades. Follow the shadows, but beware the walls that shift." We exchanged glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Could we trust her? The manor had already twisted our perceptions, fractured our realities. Yet Lila's guidance was all we had left. Jonas and Samir took the lead, their flashlights piercing the thick darkness as they moved cautiously ahead. Jonas's broad frame was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. Samir's youthful face was pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. The corridors stretched endlessly, the walls seeming to breathe and breathe, as if the manor itself inhaled and exhaled with malevolent intent. Behind them, Dr. Evelyn Marks sat quietly, her skeptical demeanor tempered by exhaustion. Even she could no longer deny the palpable dread that clung to the air, thickening with each passing moment. I tried to write in my journal, but the words felt hollow, the pen dragging across the paper as if resisting the truth I sought to capture. The manor's influence seeped into every corner of my mind, blurring the boundary between memory and nightmare. Images of my sister flickered at the edges of my vision, shadows that whispered of loss and regret. The air grew colder still, the silence punctuated only by the distant drip of water echoing through the labyrinthine halls. Every step we took seemed to stretch time, the manor's architecture warping around us, folding in on itself like a nightmare come alive. "Keep moving," Lila urged, voice trembling but steady. "The light is fading, but it's our only chance." We pressed on, each corridor a gauntlet of shifting walls and spectral illusions. The manor's hunger was insatiable, feeding on our fear, our memories, our very souls. Yet, amidst the encroaching darkness, a fragile ember of hope flickered, born from trust, from unity, from the will to survive. As we rounded a corner, the air shifted again. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in rhythm with my own ragged heartbeats. I glanced at Maya, her eyes reflecting the glow of her malfunctioning instruments, and at Lila, whose pale hand clutched her sketchbook tightly, her visions guiding us through the maze. The fading light was all we had left, and it was enough for now. But the manor was patient. It waited, watched, and dreamed, ready to consume the next breath of hope that dared to cross its threshold. And so, with every step, we moved deeper into the heart of the nightmare. The fading light, our only beacon against the ever-encroaching darkness. I stood at the center of a vast hall, the walls around me pulsating in slow, rhythmic waves as if the manor itself had a pulse. The wallpaper, once faded and peeling, now writhed with shadowy tendrils that slithered like living things, crawling and twisting along the surface. Faint whispers echoed from corners I couldn't see, voices indistinct but laden with grief and menace. I clenched my jaw, forcing my gaze forward. This was the last stand. Elliot, Leela's voice trembled behind me, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. She was seated on the cold floor, candlelight flickering across her pale face, her hands a blur as she sketched. The images poured from her pencil in fevered strokes, ghostly figures emerging from shadowy swirls, faces frozen in silent screams, hands reaching out in desperate supplication. The house didn't just feed on fear. It conjured it, manifested it, made it tangible through her visions. Jonas was nowhere to be seen, his absence a heavy weight on the room. Then a guttural roar tore through the silence, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps pounding against the floorboards. Jonas burst into the hall, eyes wild and breath ragged. Behind him, a grotesque apparition loomed, a distorted mirror image of himself. Twisted and malformed, eyes black voids, leaking shadows. The thing laughed, a chilling sound warped and broken, mocking the man's survivor's guilt, every cruel word a dagger to his spirit. "Get away from me," Jonas snarled, raising his fists, his voice shaking but resolute. The figure lunged, but Jonas met it with a ferocity born of desperation, each blow a strike against his own buried pain. The clash echoed through the hall, a violent dance of flesh and phantom, until the apparition dissolved into a mist of sorrow and rage. Nearby, Maya was bent over her equipment, fingers flying across buttons and dials as static crackled and hissed from the speakers. Her voice was steady, calm amid the chaos as she broadcasted a counter-frequency designed to disrupt the manor's psychic influence. The air around her shimmered, warping and twisting, but she held firm, a fragile beacon of hope against the relentless storm. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything: the house, the memories, the fears that had clawed at me since the moment we'd stepped inside. Then, from the depths of the shifting shadows, a figure emerged. It was Hermione's sister, her face pale and ethereal, eyes filled with that same haunting sadness I'd tried so hard to forget. She reached out, voiced a whisper that felt like 1,000 broken promises. "Elliot, come home." I wanted to run, to scream, to deny the pain she dredged up, but I stood my ground. "No," I said, voice cracking but firm. "I'm here. I'm not lost anymore." The manor trembled, the walls shaking as if enraged by my defiance. Shadows rised faster, voices rising into a cacophony of despair and fury. But amidst the chaos, a fragile calm settled within me. I wasn't alone. We weren't alone. Together, we fought, each of us confronting the darkest corners of ourselves, pushing back against the malevolent force that sought to devour us. The house screamed in fury, twisting corridors and shifting rooms in a frantic attempt to trap us forever. But our resolve hardened like steel forged in fire. Exhausted, wounded in body and spirit, we found a fleeting opening crack in the manor's armor through which we could flee. As we stumbled into the cold night air, The house behind us sighed and settled, its hunger quelled but far from sated. The manor waited, silent and watchful, already beginning to shift and reshape for the next victims. I glanced back once, shadows flickering behind shattered windows, memories and nightmares entwined in eternal dance. The house had taken much from us, but it had not broken us, not yet. And as dawn's pale light crept over the horizon, I realized this was only the beginning of a long, haunted reckoning. The night had been a crucible, burning away the illusions and lies I'd held onto for so long. Standing with Maya, Jonas, and Lila, I felt the weight of our shared ordeal, the fractures in our minds and the scars etched deep into our souls. But there was also a flicker of something precious hope, perhaps, or the stubborn ember of survival. We had faced the house's darkest horrors and lived to tell the tale. Yet, the questions lingered. Could we ever truly escape? Could the ghosts within us ever be laid to rest? And what price would we pay for the knowledge we'd gained? The manor was more than a building. It was a living nightmare, a reflection of the darkest recesses of memory and fear. It was patient, it was hungry, and it waited. For now, we were free, but the shadows would follow, and the house that dreamed would dream again. The manor was collapsing behind me, shifting walls twisting and contorting like some living beast desperate to keep its prey. My breath came in ragged gasps, heart pounding so fiercely I feared it would burst from my chest. Every step forward felt like breaking a chain that had bound me for so long, each movement a desperate plea for escape. Behind me, the echo of the manor's shifting corridors reverberated through the night. The house groaned as ancient timbers creaked and stone walls slid silently out of place, sealing off the world I had known for weeks. I didn't dare look back, but the oppressive silence that followed was heavier than any noise. It was a silence charged with menace, as if the house itself mourned my departure, already plotting to ensnare the next souls brave or foolish enough to enter. Finally, with one last burst of effort, I burst through a door that crumbled under my hands, spilling me out into the night. The cold hit me like a wave, sharp and immediate, the grass slick with dew beneath my trembling fingers. I collapsed there, chest heaving, ears ringing with the sudden absence of the manor's suffocating presence. Moonlight bathed the twisted silhouette of the house, its gables and towers warped by the distance and darkness. It stood silent yet alive, a predator resting between hunts. I traced a shaky breath, feeling the weight of what I had left behind settle deep within my bones. The others, Maya, Jonas, Lila, Samir, even Dr. Marks, their faces flickered like ghosts in my mind. Did any of them make it out? Were they lost forever within the manor's labyrinth? The question gnawed at me, tight and unforgiving. My fingers sought the familiar weight of my journal, the fragile tether to sanity I had clung to throughout the ordeal. Pulling it from my coat, I flipped through the pages, breath-catching as the words twisted and warped before my eyes. The entries I had painstakingly recorded were mutated, ink bleeding into forms that seemed to pulse with some eerie life. The manor had not released me unscathed. It still toyed with my memories, corrupting the very fabric of my reality. Sitting there under the vast, cold sky, I realized the escape was only the beginning. The house's hunger for memory and fear had left marks etched into the deepest chambers of my mind. The nightmares would not fade, the shadows would not leave, and the fragile barrier between waking and dreaming would forever remain blurred. I closed the journal slowly, the weight of the experience pressing down like a shroud. Somewhere deep inside, the house waited silent, patient, and hungry, ready to reshape itself once more, to lure and trap the next dreamer who dared to cross its threshold. As dawn crept over the horizon, I rose to my feet, the cold morning air a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness I had left behind. But even as I walked away, the manor's silhouette burned into my vision, a permanent scar upon my soul. Freedom was mine, but at a price I was only beginning to understand. I whispered into the stillness, I escaped, but the house remains, and it waits. The weight of those words settled between the morning mist and the distant, watchful shadows, a chilling promise that the nightmare was far from over. The night before my escape had been a torment I can barely recall without shivering. The manor's labyrinth had closed in, corridors twisting impossibly, doors vanishing and reappearing like cruel illusions. I was alone, or so it seemed. Voices echoed just beyond hearing, shadows flickered in the corner of my eyes. My mind frayed as the house fed on my fears, each memory of my sister's death clawing its way to the surface, raw and unrelenting. I stumbled through a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls breathing with a slow, sinister pulse. Then, a sudden shifter door appeared where none had been before. It was my only chance. I pushed it open, the wood groaning, and plunged inside. The room was small, dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb that cast grotesque shadows. In the center lay a dusty mirror, its glass cracked but reflecting my worn, haunted face. I stared, trying to steady my breath, when a whisper echoed behind me, soft, urgent, like a plea. I turned, but no one was there. Panic surged. I tore through the room, finding another door, then another. Each led me closer to the outside, though the manor fought with every inch, corridors folding back on themselves, stairs leading nowhere. Then, the final barrier, heavy door, barred by an unseen force. I pressed my hands against it, willing it to give, heart pounding in my ears. The house roared in protest, walls shuddering, but the door creaked open just enough. I slipped through, tumbling onto the cold earth beyond the house's grasp. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a death knell. Now, as dawn broke, I knew the manor was still there. It was not simply a place but a living nightmare that I carried inside me, a shadow that would follow every step. Escape was not an end, but a beginning-year-long, haunting journey through the corridors of memory and fear. And somewhere, in the darkness, the house dreamed on. The manor's silhouette was stark against the faint light of dawn when the first responders arrived days later. They found no sign of the others, only traces of scattered equipment, half-burned notes, and the footprints of one man fleeing into the wilderness. I was taken to a hospital, my mind frayed but intact. The doctors spoke of exhaustion, hallucinations brought on by stress, but I knew the truth was far darker. At night, when the world grew quiet, the manor whispered to me through dreams and waking shadows. My journal, now safely locked away, still held the distorted memories, the evidence of a place alive and hungry. I am free, but I remain a prisoner of the house that dreamed, the house that waits. What remains now is a question I cannot answer. Can the mind ever truly shed the shadows cast by such a place? Or do we all carry within us a manner of shifting walls, feeding endlessly on our deepest fears and forgotten memories? The house waits, and so do I. Elliot sat hunched over his battered journal, the worn leather cover creaking softly as he flipped through the pages. The yellowed sheets were a patchwork of hurried scrawls, diagrams, and notes, his lifeline during the investigation that had almost consumed them all. But now, something was wrong. The words seemed to shift beneath his gaze, sentences rearranging themselves in subtle but unmistakable ways. A phrase that once read, the East Wing corridors do not align, now twisted into the East Wing hides truths unknown. The air thickened around him, a chill crawling up his spine as the realization settled. The manor had followed him here, embedding its influence deep within the very fabric of his memories. He closed the journal abruptly, swallowing hard. The creeping dread that had shadowed him inside the manor was no longer confined to that haunted space. It had seeped into his mind, a silent parasite thriving in the dark corners of his psyche. Across town, Maya sat cross-legged on the living room floor of her modest apartment, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. The final recordings from the manor played on a loop, the static-laden audio interspersed with faint whispers and unsettling bursts of white noise. Her fingers trembled as she rewound and replayed a particular segment where a voice indistinct but undeniably human seemed to murmur her name. "It's just interference," she muttered to herself, though the tightness in her chest betrayed her doubt. The scientific rigor that had once defined her approach was now tempered by a cautious acceptance of the supernatural. The manor had shattered her worldview, leaving her suspended between skepticism and belief. Meanwhile, Jonas pushed himself harder than ever at the gym. Each lift, each sprint was an attempt to drown out the ghosts that haunted his thoughts. His broad shoulders glistened with sweat, muscles taut and trembling as he repeated drills with military precision. Yet beneath the steely exterior, a storm raged, a tempest of survivor's guilt and unspoken fears that no amount of physical exertion could quell. Afterward, he sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The eyes staring back were tired, haunted by memories he tried desperately to forget. But deep down, a flicker of resolve remained. He would not let the house win. In a sunlit cafe, far from the shadows of the manor, Leela's hands moved frantically over a sketch pad. Her pencil strokes were erratic yet purposeful, capturing fleeting images that danced at the edge of her vision. Faces, places, moments, fragments of the house's dark history and her own tormented visions melded into haunting compositions. Her breath came in short gasps as she fought to hold on to the images before they dissolved into the ether. Each sketch was both a release and a torment, a fragile bridge between her anxiety and the hope that understanding these visions might bring some measure of peace. The team remained scattered, physically distant but forever linked by the shared nightmare of the manor. Dr. Evelyn Marks, ever the skeptic, had retreated into research, poring over archives and folklore in an attempt to anchor the experience in historical fact. Samir's nervous energy had given way to a cautious, watchful silence, his youthful eagerness tempered by the weight of what they'd endured. Elliot's phone buzzed, breaking the heavy quiet. A message from Maya: "We need to talk." "The recordings? There's more. I think the manor's not done with us." He stared out the window at the darkening sky, shadows lengthening like the fingers of the house itself, reaching for him still. The question lingered in the air: how could they ever escape the grip of a place that haunted not just the body, but the mind? The line between memory and reality remained perilously thin. The house waited, patient and silent, its architecture shifting unseen, ready for the next dreamers to wander its halls. And Elliot Harper, once a man seeking answers, was now a prisoner of the memories that refused to fade. The steady tap of rain against the window pane is oddly soothing, a rhythmic reminder of the world still moving beyond these walls. My journal lies open on the scarred wooden table before me, pages smeared and altered in ways I cannot explain. Words I wrote with certainty now seem to twist and warp under my gaze, as if the manor itself still reaches out, its shadow long and suffocating. The memories come unbidden, unrelenting. I picture her, my sister, her laughter echoing in sunlit fields, a sound so pure it almost makes me ache. But even that warmth is contaminated now, bleeding into the cold, shifting corridors of the house that trapped us. The edges of the memory blur, the sunlit grass folding into the manor's decaying walls, the laughter twisting into something else, something sinister. I close my eyes, trying to hold on, but the images slip through my fingers like smoke. I wonder, with a shudder, if the house ever truly left me, or if I carry it inside, a parasite feeding on every fragile memory I possess. Days pass in a fog of uncertainty. I meet Maya and Jonas in a quiet cafe, an oasis of normalcy amid the chaos. Their faces mirror my own exhaustion, the lines around their eyes deepened by sleepless nights and haunted thoughts. Our conversations are tentative, often interrupted by long silences filled with unspoken fears. We each grapple with the invisible wounds, the manor-inflicted wounds, that no amount of distance seems to heal. Maya's eyes, once sharp with scientific certainty, now carry a cautious, wary gleam. Jonas, ever the protector, seems smaller somehow, weighed down by the guilt and helplessness he never voiced inside the house. Even Lila, whose sensitivity brought us comfort during the darkest hours, is distant, her gaze flickering as if haunted by unseen presences. I try to explain the journal, the way its pages changed, the words rearranged by forces beyond comprehension. Maya listens, skeptical but open, while Jonas shakes his head in frustration, unable to accept that reality could be so malleable, so cruelly deceptive. That night, I dream again of the manor, its walls breathing and folding around me like a living thing. The corridors twist and stretch, impossible angles folding into one another, drowning me in a labyrinth without end. Through the shadows, I hear her voice, soft, familiar, calling my name. It is both a balm and a torment, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. I wake, gasping, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. The line between nightmare and waking life is thinner than ever, and I fear it will not hold much longer. The days stretch on, each one a battle to hold on to what is real. Sometimes I catch myself talking to her, whispering apologies into the empty air, as if she might answer. I know it is madness, but the manor's influence lingers, a stain upon my mind that refuses to fade. I write in a journal again, though the words feel hollow, shadows of thoughts I can barely grasp. I wonder if I am the last to remember truly, or if the house will one day consume even these fragile threads of consciousness. The mirror mocks me, reflecting a face I barely recognize, haunted eyes, taut and weary. A man forever changed by a place that should have remained forgotten. I touch the glass, searching for some sign of myself beneath the surface, but find only a stranger staring back. Is this what survival means? To carry the weight of the past, to be haunted by memories that may no longer be your own? I do not have answers, only the creeping dread that the house waits still, patient and silent, its architecture shifting just beyond the edges of perception, ready to reach out again. I am left with the question that haunts me most. How can I ever know what is truly real when the very fabric of memory is a playground for nightmares? And with that question, the shadows lengthen and the night deepens. Outside, the city hums with life, oblivious to the battles waged in quiet rooms and fractured minds. I rise from the chair, the journal clutched tightly in my hands, and stare out at the rain-soaked streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wells a sharp, urgent sound that cuts through the stillness. I am alive, I am free, but at what cost? The house waits, and I fear it will not wait forever. This is not the end, not yet. the nightmare continues. I only hope I can find the strength to face it. The line between memory and nightmare is thinner than I ever imagined, and I am trapped somewhere in between. I close the journal, the weight of the words pressing down on me like the manna's own breath. Tomorrow, I will try again to piece together what remains of myself. But tonight, I am left with the haunted reflections of a past that refuses to die. I watched from the threshold, body numb, heart hollow, as the first grey tendrils of morning crept over the twisted spires and broken windows. The house that dreamed was quiet, now too quiet, but I knew better. The silence was not peace. It was the waiting breath of something patient, ancient, and hungry. The air tasted of cold, stone, and dust, thick with the residue of memories long consumed. The manor's walls, scarred and peeling, seemed to pulse subtly, an imperceptible movement that teased the edge of perception. I blinked, and the hallway I had just walked seemed to stretch and warp, the doorways shifting their places like a serpent shedding skin. The house was alive, breathing in the dark, folding itself like a labyrinthine riddle with no answer. Inside my pocket, I felt the weight of the journal. Its leather cover was cracked, smeared with grime, the edges curling as if warped by unseen hands. I pulled it out, fingers trembling, and flipped through the pages. The words I had painstakingly written my anchor to reality were distorted, sentences twisted into unfamiliar shapes. The house had rewritten my memories, folding them into its own malevolent narrative. "Why do you resist me?" a voice whispered, not in the air, but inside my mind. It was the house, or perhaps my own fractured psyche speaking through its walls. "Your memories feed me. Your fears sustain me." I pressed the journal to my chest, fighting the urge to collapse. Every step I had taken inside these cursed halls had been a descent into madness, a peeling away of self. The faces of my teammates haunted Mamaya's hopeful eyes, now clouded. Jonas's clenched fists, trembling with desperation. Leela's fragile sketches, bleeding shadows into reality. They were gone, lost to the house's insatiable hunger. Outside, a cold wind stirred the skeletal branches of dead trees. The manor seemed to breathe with the wind, its shutters banging softly like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like roots sinking into the earth. Here, in this place, time was a trick, memory a weapon, and fear the currency with which the house bought eternity. I whispered into the emptiness, "I see you. I see what you are." The walls shifted again, a subtle folding that made the front door vanish from sight. The manor was reshaping itself, preparing for its next guests, its next feast. Somewhere deep inside, the echoes of past screams mingled with whispered regrets and forgotten names, tapestry of trauma woven into the very stones. I turned away, the first rays of sun striking my face, burning away the night's chill but not the shadow in my soul. The house waited, patient and eternal, a monument to the darkest corners of the human mind. And though I had escaped its physical grasp, its mark would never leave me. Memory is a fragile thing, pliable and elusive. The manor had taught me that. It feeds on what we fear to remember, twisting it until we are lost. And in that loss, it grows stronger. I walked away, but the house was behind me, in every lingering doubt, every trembling breath, every restless dream. It waits still, and it will wait forever.